On the 29th of May, 1453, the walls of Constantinople, walls that have stood for 1,000 years, walls that have turned back Avars and Arabs and Rus and Crusaders and every other force that the medieval world could assemble against them, finally give way before the Ottoman artillery of Mehmed II. The last Roman emperor, Constantine XI Palaiologos, dies fighting on those walls, his body never conclusively identified among the dead. The Hagia Sophia, the largest church in Christendom for nearly 1,000 years, is converted to a mosque before the smoke of the siege has cleared. The city that called itself the New Rome, the city that had carried the administrative, theological, and commercial inheritance of the ancient Roman Empire through 10 centuries of crisis, invasion, and slow territorial dismemberment, ceases to exist as a Christian imperial capital. The immediate military and political consequences of Constantinople's fall are widely understood. What is less understood is the nature of the vacuum it creates, a vacuum not merely of territory or military power, but of legitimacy, of theological authority, of commercial infrastructure, and of the symbolic framework through which Christian rulers in the eastern half of the world have organized their claims to sovereign power. That vacuum does not remain empty for long. Within a generation, a prince in a cold and peripheral city that most of the civilized world regards as a minor outpost of a former Mongol tributary state begins the most audacious rebranding operation in medieval history, positioning his city, his dynasty, and his church as the rightful inheritors of everything Constantinople represented. His name is Ivan III, Grand Prince of Moscow, and what he understands, with a clarity that almost no one else in the Christian world grasps immediately, is that Constantinople's fall is not merely a catastrophe, it is an opportunity. To understand what Ivan inherits and what he claims, it is necessary to understand what Constantinople actually was, not in the romantic terms of religious poetry, but in the precise terms of power and commerce. Byzantium at its height was the administrative center of Orthodox Christianity, the seat of the ecumenical patriarch whose authority over the Orthodox churches of Russia, Bulgaria, Serbia, Georgia, and the broader Eastern Christian world was absolute in matters of doctrine and deeply influential in matters of politics. The Byzantine emperor held a title, Basileus, later autocrator, that carried a specific weight in the Orthodox political imagination. The emperor was not merely a king among kings, but the earthly representative of divine order, the protector of the universal Christian church, the figure whose legitimacy sanctified the legitimacy of lesser Christian rulers who existed in subordinate relationship to him. This was not merely theology, it was governance infrastructure. The Byzantine Church provided Russia with its metropolitan, the head of the Russian Orthodox Church, appointed from Constantinople, accountable to Constantinople, carrying the theological and institutional weight of Constantinople behind every ecclesiastical decision he made in Russian territory. When a Russian prince quarreled with another Russian prince, the metropolitan's alignment mattered. When a dynasty needed legitimation, the Byzantine Church's endorsement was the coin of the realm. The entire spiritual and administrative apparatus of the Russian Orthodox Church ran, in effect, as a subsidiary of the Byzantine imperial ecclesiastical system. Beyond theology, Constantinople was the commercial anchor of the Eastern Mediterranean trading world. The city sits at the Bosphorus, the narrow strait connecting the Black Sea to the Mediterranean, the single choke point through which the entire trade flow between the Black Sea basin, grain from Ukraine, furs and amber from Russia, slaves and fish from the Crimea, and the markets of the Mediterranean must pass. Whoever controls Constantinople controls the tariff revenue on this trade, controls the diplomatic relationships with the merchant communities that conduct it, and controls the physical infrastructure of the most strategically located harbor in the known world. Byzantine commercial law, Byzantine weights and measures, Byzantine banking instruments, letters of credit, commercial contracts, partnership agreements developed over centuries of sophisticated mercantile activity, are the operational framework within which trade across the entire Orthodox Christian world is conducted. When Mehmed II's cannon bring down the walls and the Ottoman flag rises over the Hagia Sophia, all of this, the theological authority, the ecclesiastical infrastructure, the commercial network, the symbolic legitimating framework, is simultaneously orphaned. The ecumenical patriarch remains in Constantinople under Ottoman rule, reduced to a figure managing a subordinate religious community within an Islamic empire, stripped of the imperial backing that had given his pronouncements political force. The trade routes through the Bosphorus now belong to the Ottomans, who are not interested in preserving Byzantine commercial arrangements, but in extracting revenue from them on Ottoman terms. The Byzantine imperial family is scattered. Those who survive the siege flee to the Italian city-states, to the Aegean islands, to Rome, to anywhere that will receive them. In Moscow, the fall of Constantinople arrives as news carried by merchants and refugees over a journey of weeks. The reaction in the Russian church and court is not merely grief, it is calculation. Moscow in 1453 is a significant but not dominant power in the Russian world. Ivan III's grandfather, Vasily I, and his father, Vasily II, have spent decades consolidating Muscovite authority over rival Russian principalities, absorbing Suzdal, fighting off Tver, managing the complicated politics of a state still formally subordinate to the Golden Horde. The Mongol successor state, whose Khans have collected tribute from Russian princes for 2 centuries. Moscow's relationship with Constantinople has been close. The Russian metropolitan had his seat in Moscow, and the Muscovite princes had cultivated Byzantine connections as a source of prestige and ecclesiastical backing for their consolidation campaigns. The fall of Constantinople does not immediately transform Moscow's position, but it plants a seed that Ivan III, coming to power as Grand Prince in 1462, will spend the next 4 decades cultivating with extraordinary patience and political intelligence. The first move Ivan makes is the marriage. In 1472, with the active encouragement of Pope Sixtus IV, who has his own reasons for wanting a powerful Orthodox prince to serve as a counterweight to Ottoman expansion, Ivan III marries Sophia Paleologina, the niece of the last Byzantine emperor Constantine XI. The marriage is arranged through Byzantine exile networks operating out of Rome, and the Pope imagines it as the first step toward bringing Russia into a Catholic-led anti-Ottoman coalition. Ivan has no such intention. What he wants from the marriage is not a papal alliance, but a genealogical claim, direct dynastic connection to the Byzantine imperial house, transmitted through Sophia's bloodline, making Ivan and any children he produces the closest living relatives of the last legitimate Roman emperor. Sophia arrives in Moscow bringing more than bloodline. She brings Byzantine court ceremonial, Byzantine architectural sensibility, Byzantine ideas about the relationship between ruler and church, ruler and nobility, and ruler and the concept of imperial authority itself. Italian architects arrive with her entourage, recruited through Byzantine exile networks in Rome, and Ivan sets them to work rebuilding the Moscow Kremlin in stone, replacing the wooden fortifications of a frontier principality with the marble and brick of something that aspires to look like an imperial capital. The Cathedral of the Dormition, rebuilt by the Bolognese architect Aristotele Fioravanti between 1475 and 1479, is constructed deliberately to echo the proportions and grandeur of Byzantine ecclesiastical architecture, a physical argument in stone that Moscow is the spiritual heir of Constantinople. The double-headed eagle appears in Muscovite iconography in this period, the heraldic symbol of the Byzantine Empire, facing east and west simultaneously, representing dominion over 2 continents. Even adopts it as the seal of the Muscovite state. The gesture is not decorative. Heraldic symbols in the 15th century carry specific political arguments. The double-headed eagle asserts a direct symbolic continuity between Byzantium and Moscow, a visual claim that anyone familiar with Byzantine imperial imagery, and the rulers of every European and Middle Eastern state will read immediately. Ivan begins styling himself with titles that had belonged exclusively to Byzantine emperors. The Slavic word Tsar, derived from Caesar, had been used informally by Russian princes to refer to Mongol Khans or Byzantine emperors, rulers of acknowledged superior status. Ivan appropriates it for himself, applying it to Moscow's own sovereign authority. He begins using the title Gosudar, sovereign, in diplomatic correspondence, displacing the older and humbler title of knyaz, or prince, which implied a figure within a hierarchy rather than at the top of one. In letters to foreign rulers, he deploys the full weight of the Byzantine imperial titulature, presenting himself not as one Christian ruler among many, but as the preeminent sovereign of the Orthodox Christian world. The ecclesiastical dimension of this claim requires the most careful management. The ecumenical patriarch still exists in Constantinople, now under Ottoman authority, and technically retains his authority over the Russian Church. But his position is visibly compromised, a Christian religious leader operating under an Islamic imperial system, his pronouncements now subject to Ottoman approval, his ability to act as the independent voice of Orthodox Christianity fundamentally constrained. The Russian Church, observing this situation, begins developing the theological and institutional arguments for a degree of independence that would have been unthinkable when Constantinople was a functioning Christian empire. The Council of Florence in 1439 had already provided a critical rupture. Byzantine desperation for Western military aid against the Ottomans had led the Byzantine emperor and the ecumenical patriarch to sign a declaration of union between the Orthodox and Catholic churches, a theological compromise that the Russian Church had flatly rejected as heretical capitulation. The Russian Metropolitan Isidore, who signed the Florence Accord, had been deposed and expelled by Vasily II the moment he returned to Moscow with the news. The Russian Church had then appointed its own metropolitan, Jonah of Moscow, without Constantinople's approval, establishing in practice, if not yet in doctrine, the principle that Moscow's church could govern itself. Constantinople's fall in 1453 completes the separation. With the Patriarch now under Ottoman rule, the argument for Russian ecclesiastical independence becomes unanswerable. If the center of Orthodox Christianity has been conquered by an Islamic empire, then the protection and continuation of true orthodoxy must pass to the largest free Orthodox Christian state, which is Moscow. The theological framework for this argument is developed and articulated most explicitly in a letter written around 1510 by a monk named Philotheus of Pskov to Ivan III's son and successor, Vasily III. Two Romes have fallen, Philotheus writes. The first Rome fell to heresy. The second Rome, Constantinople, has fallen to the Ottomans. A third Rome has risen, and it is Moscow. A fourth Rome there shall never be. Philotheus is writing after the fact, articulating in explicit theological language a claim that Ivan III has been building in political and commercial practice for decades. But the formulation captures something essential about the logic of what Ivan has constructed. The Third Rome claim is not primarily a religious argument, though it uses religious language. It is a political economy argument. What the Third Rome claim asserts is that Moscow has inherited the legitimating framework that made Constantinople the center of the Orthodox Christian world. And with that framework, the right to the tributary relationships, the commercial networks, the diplomatic acknowledgement, and the political deference that the Byzantine emperor had once commanded from Orthodox Christian rulers across Eastern Europe and the Caucasus. The commercial implications are direct. Trade routes that had previously flowed through Constantinople, goods moving between the Black Sea, the Russian interior, and the Mediterranean world, have been disrupted and partially redirected by Ottoman control of the Bosphorus. Ivan III begins working to redirect a portion of this trade northward, through Russian-controlled territory, framing Moscow as an alternative commercial hub for the Orthodox world. The diplomatic relationships Moscow builds with the Crimean Khanate, with the Georgian kingdoms, with the Serbian Church, and with the Orthodox communities of the Balkans under Ottoman rule are not purely religious. They are commercial relationships managed through the framework of shared Orthodox Christian identity, using the same language of imperial protection and ecclesiastical solidarity that Byzantine emperors had used to organize the trade of the Eastern Christian world for centuries. The Novgorod campaign of 1478 is the clearest illustration of how the Third Rome claim converts ideology into territory. Novgorod, the great merchant republic of northern Russia, maintains independent commercial relationships with the Hanseatic League, the German merchant federation that dominates Baltic trade, and has historically looked to Catholicism and Western European commerce rather than to Byzantium and the Orthodox East for its commercial orientation. Ivan's annexation of Novgorod is presented in Moscow as the reunification of Russian Orthodox lands under a single sovereign, a religious and political argument about legitimate Muscovite authority over all Orthodox Russians. But the commercial stakes are equally large. Novgorod controls the fur trade of northern Russia, the most valuable export commodity in the Russian economy. And absorbing Novgorod means absorbing that trade and redirecting its revenues through Muscovite control rather than Hanseatic channels. The ideology and the commerce are inseparable. The Third Rome claim provides the language for the conquest. The fur trade provides the reason for it. Ivan's management of the relationship with the Golden Horde follows the same logic. By 1480, the Great Stand on the Ugra River, a confrontation between Muscovite and Mongol forces that ends without battle when the Mongol army withdraws, effectively ends 2 centuries of Mongol tributary authority over Russia, though the transition has been gradual rather than sudden. Ivan stops paying tribute to the Golden Horde Khan without a formal declaration of independence, simply allowing the tributary relationship to lapse as Muscovite power grows and the Horde fractures into competing successor states. The Third Rome ideology provides the framework for understanding this transition in ideological terms. Moscow is not merely a formally subordinate principality, freeing itself from external control, but the legitimate heir of an imperial tradition that does not acknowledge subordination to any earthly sovereign other than God. The title Ivan finally settles on, Gosudar Vysaya Rusi, sovereign of all Russia, is carefully constructed to make a territorial claim as wide as the Orthodox Christian population of the Russian lands, not merely the territory Moscow currently controls. Every Orthodox Russian prince, not yet under Muscovite authority, is implicitly included in that formulation. Their independence a temporary condition, awaiting the natural completion of the unified Russian sovereign state that the Third Rome ideology demands must exist. Ivan's successors will spend the next century and a half converting that implicit claim into explicit territorial control, using the same language of Orthodox unity and legitimate imperial succession to justify absorption after absorption. What falls through the Bosphorus with Constantinople's walls in 1453 is not merely a city or an empire. It is a system of commercial organization, theological authority, diplomatic legitimating language, and symbolic power that has structured the political and economic life of the Eastern Christian world for 1,000 years. Systems of that magnitude do not simply disappear when the institution that anchored them is destroyed. They migrate, they are claimed, they are rebuilt, imperfectly but recognizably, by whoever has the ambition to claim them and the political intelligence to make the claims stick. Ivan III has both. The Moscow he builds between 1462 and his death in 1505 is a city that did not exist in any meaningful sense 40 years before his reign. A peripheral, wooden-walled principality in a cold river valley, paying tribute to Mongols, subordinate to a Byzantine church it could not control, unable to project power much beyond its immediate neighbors. The Moscow he leaves behind is a stone-walled imperial capital with a dynastic marriage connection to the last Roman emperor, a state church that governs itself independently of any external authority, a symbolic vocabulary borrowed wholesale from Byzantium and redeployed to claim the political inheritance of the most important city in the Orthodox Christian world, and a territorial logic that will not stop expanding until it runs out of continent. The Third Rome is built not from the ruins of Constantinople, but from the opportunity those ruins represent. A vacuum of that size, in a world that organizes itself around legitimate authority and the symbolic frameworks through which authority is recognized and transmitted, does not wait for a worthy inheritor. It rewards the ruler who moves fastest, claims loudest, and builds most convincingly the institutional architecture to make the claim real. In the autumn of 1453, while the Ottoman flag rises over the Hagia Sophia and the last Byzantine refugees pack whatever they can carry onto whatever boats will take them, a young prince in Moscow is 12 years old. He has 50 years ahead of him, and the largest unclaimed inheritance in the Christian world is sitting open.